Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 10 of What If Naruto was the Jinchuriki of the world leader. If you guys enjoyed this what if, and want to see part 11 of it, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel. Before we start, please do support for more awesome content. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. The blizzard hit an hour after the second exam started. At first, it was simply a light dusting of snowflakes that floated lazily down from the sky. But within minutes it became a storm of driving ice that forced every team to hunker down in whatever shelter they could make that wouldn't collapse within minutes under the force of the falling snow, and wait it out. That waiting took the rest of the day and the whole night, with the blizzard finally fading just as the sun peeked over the horizon. Now the Valley of Blades was covered in nearly 3 feet of snow, providing an entirely new range of challenges the Genin had to deal with. One such team from Kusagakure waded through the white powder, shivering and cursing the cold. Kusa was mild year-round, and the coldest part of winter would result in frost on the grass, if that, so they were completely unprepared for snow. God, it's so fucking cold. One of the shinobi complained loudly, dressed in a pair of loose green pants and a forest green vest. Good camouflage in the grasslands and forests, but not so much in the snow. Shut up, here, shouted the girl of the team, a brunette in a set of dark blue robes with a round straw hat on her head. We know it's fucking cold. We are well aware of that. Both of you, be quiet. The leader, a shinobi with bandages wrapped around his mouth like a mask, ordered, sharp gray eyes glancing suspiciously round at the blades protruding from the snow. There was only silence amidst the cold, white environment. A sharp whistle cut the air and Hiro cried out, hitting the ground with a black shuriken sticking from his thigh. The kunoichi drew a kunai and spun around, on guard for more attacks. A pair of whistles sounded as 2 more black shurikens stabbed into her shoulders, and another into the back of her knee, taking her out of the fight. The leader pivoted rapidly, 2 kunai in his hands and sweat freezing on his forehead. He too tumbled to the ground in pain as a black shuriken lanced into his thigh and another into his right shoulder, and one more into the top of his left hand. Hiro made to rise, but was cut down by another black star that was thrown hard enough to knock him down, bouncing harshly off of his hideate. As the down team laid there, where they fell in the snow, fading quickly into unconsciousness due to their injuries, a pair of feminine voices could be heard in the distance. I trained for years to get as good as I am with my weapons, but you go on one trip with Naruto and come back with shuriken that completely blow my skills out of the water. One vocalized in disbelief. To be fair, the trip was just to find Naruto, not acquire anything else. Another returned stoically. How the fuck is that fair? A team of Konoha Genin appeared from behind a blade and approached the downed Kusa team, the angry voice coming from the Genin Kunoichi in pink, Tenten. Next to her was her teammate, Nichiko. His eyes were pale yellow with veins bulging in her temples, a clear sign of her using the Byakugan. Fairness is relative, Tenten. Just because my shuriken are good at long range, doesn't mean I can hurl a battle axe like you can. Nichiko stated, ripping the black amulet around the nearly unconscious Genin's neck away. We have what we need. Time to get the storm spire, and out of this cold. Lee pumped his fists into the air. Yosh. With such a speedy victory, we will have proved that our flames of youth burn with the passion of thousand suns. The Hyuga Genin scowled at the way her teammate's voice echoed off the rocks. Lee, shut up, sounds carry in such an empty space. She paused to collect her shuriken, and they quickly moved off. Hiro groaned as a pair of Kumo Chunin arrived to take them from the field. Why did we have to get taken down by such a homo? Samui was bleeding, lifeblood dripping onto the snow and tainting dread. She clutched her side, panting in pain and exertion as she limped through the snow-driven valley. Naruto. Yujido. She called desperately. When no answer came, she leaned against the flat side of a blade and allowed hot tears to spill from her eyes, and they froze to her cheeks. She was alone. Alone, injured and afraid. Her lover and her sister could be anywhere in this frozen hell. What do we have here? A voice came from above her. Samui jumped in fright and stumbled away from the blade, looking up to see an Iwa Genin leering down at her from atop the tip. Seems we got a lost little leaf, all alone in the snow. Another voice said, coming from a kunoichi that sidled around the same stalagmite. Another Iwa shinobi came around the other side, crossing his arms and examining her closely. She doesn't have the amulet we need. He stated crossly, looking irritated. Kill her and let's be moving on. Aw, damn. The kunoichi whined playfully. You sure I can't cut her up just a little bit? Look at that skin. It's so pale and smooth and cuttable. Samui heard those words and saw the murderous gleam in that kunoichi's eyes. She turned and ran as fast as she could, hearing the woman excitedly shout out, yes. I love it when they run. She sounded more than a little aroused. Samui ran, dodging through the blades, hearing metal crack against rock, as the Iwa Genin threw shuriken and kunai at her. Her heart pounded as her legs pumped. Naruto. Yujido. Help me. A ball of compacted mud slammed into her back, driving the air from her lungs, and her body into the ground. Help me, help me. An Iwa shinobi called in mockingly falsetto voice. Fucking leaf pansies, can't even die with some damn dignity. Samui looked up, tears in her eyes, as she was surrounded by the Iowa team, fenced in by bodies and white stalagmites. She held up a shaking hand. Wait, she pleaded, tears spilling from her eyes. The Kunoichi of the team looked surprised before she threw her head back and guffawed, the humored noise echoing off of the emptiness. Wait? She asked incredulously. The Kunoichi, a leaf Kunoichi, gets on the wrong side of a jutsu, and all you can say is wait. Wait for what? Wait for us to change our minds. Wait for your friends to help. Wait for... The stalagmite behind the Iowa Kunoichi crumpled as something burst from it, gliding over the snow like a wraith to impale her through the heart with a tanto. No, wait for me to kill you. Samui hissed viciously in her ear. The Iowa leader turned as the stalagmite behind him was blown apart, find a large figure robed in white, to grab him by the face, and hurl him into an actual blade, crying out in pain, when two icicles stabbed through his shoulders, and pinned him to the rock face. Yujiro ducked and rolled forward, her snow built cover collapsing as she dove through it, driving a kunai into the back of the other Iowa shinobi's knee. As he fell to the ground, howling in pain, she yanked the blade out and shoved it up into his throat, through his mouth and into his brain. Naruto slapped the thrashing genin's legs away from him as he moved in and snatched the white amulet hanging around his neck, storing it in his pocket. We have what we need, ladies. Let's finish it off. Our job done, Samui's clone collapsed into a puddle of red-tinted, frosty water. The actual Samui removed her blade from the Iowa Kunoichi's back, and let the corpse fall to the ground, wiping the blood staining her tanto away on the snow. Yujiro gave up on retrieving her kunai, pushing the dead body away, leaving, and looting a couple replacements from the corpse. The team leader panted in pain and anger as his comrades' blood spread on the snow around them. I'll kill you for this. He screamed, frothing at the mouth. I know your faces. I know where you live. I swear to. Naruto stepped forward and punched the shouting shinobi in the throat, cartilage crunching as his trachea was crushed. The dragon nodded to his teammates, and they left the choking genin to his fate, disappearing into the snow, as if they had never been there with the exception of 3 corpses. Why was I the bait? Samui asked in an irritated, muffled whisper. It was just a clone, and you wouldn't even act like that in the same situation. Yujiro replied with a dry look. And you drew the short straw, that's why. Ladies, Naruto interjected quietly, keep it down. The 2 sisters nodded and fell silent as they trekked through the Valley of Blades. Using a variation of the tree and water walking techniques, they walked over the snow, leaving only the barest of imprints and the white powder. In addition to that, they had used the bandages sealed in Yujiro's field medicine kit to wrap themselves in the white cloth, covering their bodies and leaving only their eyes in the open. They were ghosts in the snow. Team Yugao traveled for hours, the spire and the malevolent storm surrounding it growing closer with each step, distant thunder rapidly booming over the distance like drums, occasionally joined by screams and shouts. It had started snowing again, white flakes buffeting the exposed parts of their faces. Can't you get rid of this? Yujiro asked in annoyance, wiping her eyes for what felt like the 20th time in a minute. I could get rid of it, sure. Naruto admitted easily. But I won't. It's good camouflage, and if I did, it would alert the others that there is something out there that can change the weather when it suits them. The blonde Jinchuriki sighed in resignation, tightening the bandages around her face. I know, I just wanted to bitch a little. The silence is getting to me. The hybrid suddenly pulled up, his ears perking, while he looked around suspiciously. And then a feminine scream rent the air. Help me. A flash of red caught their attention as a Kunoichi in a tanko dashed through the area ahead of them, followed by 2 teammates in pack of large white-gray wolves that had nearly caught up. And then they did. One of the shinobi tripped and sprawled on his face in the snow, screaming as something pounced on his back and fastened terribly sharp fangs around his neck, then whipped at his head, ending his life with a sharp snap and a gurgle. The second shinobi turned and threw a handful of shuriken at another beast, the metal stars leaving basically harmless scratches, and only angered the wolf. The genin reached into his pouch to grab more weapons when another beast tackled him from the side, and furiously tore at his face, shredding his arms as he vainly tried to protect his throat. Naruto narrowed his eyes and summoned the Dawnbreaker from its seal on his hand, and made to move forward, only to be stopped by Samui grabbing his arm. What are you doing? He jerked his head at the screaming redhead, who had stumbled and ran into the flat side of a stalagmite, tumbling into the snow. Saving her life. He stated obviously, giving the blonde a strange look. Why? She asked in confusion. Naruto arched an eyebrow at her, frowning lightly. So, you saying you don't want to save a helpless human from being eaten alive by wolves? He questioned. She looked at the hysterically crying girl as the wolves closed in inside, shaking her head. Thought so. Naruto dashed forward, jumping on top of a blade, and leapt through the air as the wolf lunged for the girl. He landed on its back and drove it to the ground, his silver blade flashing as he drove into the wolf's throat, before ripping it out and spilling hot blood onto the snow. The hybrid gripped the Dawnbreaker as he stood in front of the red-haired genin, glancing back to see her staring up at him with wide solid red eyes. Karen sat on the ground, cold wetness seeping through her pants, her panting fogging her glasses, staring up at the tall, white-clothed man who just saved her life, standing with one foot on a dead wolf, glowing silver sword in hand, looking at her with concerned reddish-orange eyes that should have inspired terror, but oddly didn't. Time slowed to crawl is her favorite technique, the mind's eye of Kagura, activated without any conscious effort, but something changed. Instead of showing the tall swordsman's chakra, it showed something else entirely. A red sun was erupting behind him. He stood before her, clad in plate armor of the purest, but not blinding white with a golden sun embossed on the breastplate, which glittered and pulsed like something alive. The white cape, trimmed in gold, decorated with a crimson swirl surrounded by runic scratches on his back, fluttered in the wind. Clutched in his hand was that silver blade, gleaming proudly in the light, golden veins flowing through it like blood, the guard shining with a miniature sun, the scaled hilt gripped tightly in one hand. She could see most of his face. It was bereft of tattoos or markings, showing light gray skin. Vicious white horn swept back from his head, looking regal and threatening at the same time, like a crown of blades. A helm of white plate fit around his horns, and covered his forehead and nose, leaving his eyes free. His eyes, he was staring at her with a burning, but comforting intensity. There were chips of obsidian floating pools of molten gold, his look that radiating power, safety, and warmth. His lips curled into a soft smile, and she couldn't help the gasp that escaped her lips. My knight. Naruto held his arm up as one of the other beasts lunged at him and locked his jaw around his forearm, sharp teeth failing to penetrate his thick skin. He angled the dawn breaker up and stabbed it under the wolf's ribs, the silver blade fatally penetrating the heart. The wolves jumped away from the corpses of their prey and circled the hybrid as he tossed the body of their deceased brethren away. The alpha of the pack, a wolf with red eyes and white fur, snarled at him, baring its teeth and waving its tail behind it, trying to be intimidating. Having been challenged, Naruto narrowed his eyes on the pack, and pulled the bandages covering his mouth away. His eyes began glowing fiercely, and his teeth grew into sharp black fangs as his dragon side reared its head. He sucked in a deep breath and stepped forward, opening his mouth and unleashing a bestial roar, the power of the sound causing the snow to scatter in front of him. His fangs clicked as he closed his mouth and glared at the wolves, who sat still and fearful for a second, as the roar echoed off of the rocks. As one, they turned tail and bolted from his presence, whimpering piteously with their tails between their legs. Satisfied with the effect, Naruto glanced back at the Kusagenin shivering in the snow, who was still staring at him with wide red eyes. He slowly knelt next to her and held out his hand. Are you alright? He asked carefully. She looked between his hand and his face for a few seconds, shocked. She slowly reached out, and took his much larger hand, her whole body shaking in a mix of adrenaline, fear and relief. You saved me. She mumbled to herself, looking at the cooling bodies of her teammates. Karen stumbled and buried her face in his shoulder, wrapping her arms around his neck, beginning to sob. My knight. Naruto blinked in confusion at the title, hugging her back carefully and glancing at his teammates with a questioning look on his face. They shrugged in return and began searching the bodies for the amulet. With two teammates dead, it's not as if Karen would be able to complete the test any longer. Naruto gently pulled the red head away from his shoulder, and wiped the tears away from her face. Hey, don't worry, alright. You're safe now, okay? He said comfortingly. Karen nodded and sniffled, wiping her face with her sleeve. What's your name? He asked gently, drawing her attention away from the corpses, and making her look up into his eyes. Karen Uzumaki. She replied softly, cleaning her glasses on her coat. Naruto drew back in surprise. Really? My name is Naruto Uzumaki. He said in disbelief. Karen looked up at him, confusion and hope on her features. Well, really? I thought I was the last one. She sprang forward and hugged him again, actually smiling. Vegito approached the two of them with her sister in tow, and handed him a black amulet that had been taken from one of the corpses. We really need to get moving again, all of this noise will have attracted attention we don't need. She tilted her chin at Karen. What are we going to do with her? The Kumo Chunin appeared on top of a nearby stalagmite, the smoke from his shunshin quickly dissipating. We will take her from the exam area, and bring her back to her sensei, as we do with all the other teams that can no longer complete the test. He explained shortly, holding his hand out to Karen. Karen shot a sad look at the bodies of her teammates, and tightened her grip on Naruto's arm. Will I be able to stay in Kumo for the rest of the exams? She asked worriedly, not wanting to leave. The Chunin nodded once. Yes, but we need to leave now. He shook his arm for emphasis. She nodded back and hugged Naruto tightly. Thank you for saving me, Naruto. We need to meet again so we can talk about our clan. Of course, I'll look for you after this test. Naruto replied determinedly, patting her on the shoulder. Stay safe. The Chunin stepped forward and placed a hand on the red hat's shoulder, the both of them vanishing in a bolt of lightning, as Team Yugao took off towards the spire once again. The spire was far taller than any of the blades in the valley, with a forked top made of two thick lightning rods that were struck nearly twice a minute. Thick angry black clouds swirled ominously round top. Thunder pounded heavily and lightning cracked angrily. The earth the hill rested on seemingly made of obsidian, having been blackened and turned to glass from constant strikes, that left the ground white hot in multiple glowing spots. As they approached the hill, Naruto looked up at the clouds with a furrowed brow. Those clouds are unnatural, he thought. They feel more like a chakra construct, as opposed to a natural thing. It's more than likely that it is. Aldrin commented, idly scratching his chin with a talon. A past Raikage may have created it either as a source of energy for Kumo, or as a sign of strength for visitors. That would fit with what I know. Naruto handed the 2 amulets off to the girls, who put them around their necks and linked hands with him. As they stepped up and made to move forward, someone called out, "Wait." Team Yugao turned around to find Team 7 running up to them, looking battle-worn. Suki had few cuts on herself, while Sakura seemed to be missing a chunk of her hair, and was limping slightly, while Hanabi had a nasty-looking bruise forming on her left cheek. "Naruto-kun." The Uchiha heirs called, arriving in front of them. "Hey ladies," he greeted them easily. It's not as if they would be attacked by their friends, and even if they were, they could simply just step into the storm and be protected by the lightning. "You look tired." Suki huffed, holding her side tenderly. "You could say that. Some jackass snatched our amulet while we were fighting another team, and they both split, so we had to chase down the guy, while the others got away," she explained. "We caught him a while back, and got ours back, and we saw you guys." Samui spoke up suddenly, drawing their attention. "Do you need a black amulet?" Hanabi blinked in surprise, giving the buxom blonde an incredulous look. "Yeah, that's the one we need. You have an extra." She nodded, taking the extra from Naruto, and tossing it to Hyuga heirs. "We just got that. We were going to keep it to parse down the competition, but I would prefer to have as many of us moving on as possible," she replied with a shrug. Suki nodded her thanks, hanging the white necklace around her neck, while Hanabi did the same with the black, and both put Sakura's arms over their shoulders, and held to support her. Together, the 2 teams trekked up the glassed hill, warily watching the lightning strike around them. They approached the base of the spire, finding a pair of large wooden doors barring their way. The doors were locked, with keyholes shaped like the amulets around their necks. Inscribed on the door was a quote. "To stand amongst the stormers to the rest" was scribbled over with black marker, left by a far less polite individual. "It's all about balance, bitches. KB." Samui and Yujiro shared exasperated looks. "Killer B," they muttered, shaking their heads. They stepped forward and pressed their amulets to the locks, which began to glow. The lock clicked, and the doors slowly opened inward, allowing both teams entry into the spire. They made their way down a small corridor that was lined with torches, leading to another pair of doors. As they walked, Team Yugao stripped their camouflage off and stored it. Pushing the doors open, the teams found themselves awash in warmth. In contrast to the white snow and grey rock outside, the inside of the storm spire was warm and homey, with a large hearth that had a fire crackling merrily away inside of it. Sitting around the fire and in other parts of the room were various genin from varying villages, more than one holding a steaming cup of something and sitting in comfortable chairs. As they entered, the ninja looked up, and more than a few waved in greeting. One genin stood up from her chair and approached the teams casually, a gentle smile on her face. "I'm glad to see that you've passed the test," Hinata said happily, nodding to her sister and Naruto. "We've got a few days before the next portion of the test, so follow me. I'll lead you to the medical center." She folded her hands in the sleeves of her jacket, and gestured for them to follow her, leading the 2 teams from the room. Once they were in an empty hallway, the kindly stoic Hinata faded, and was replaced by Hinata the sister. She quickly stepped up, and wrapped her arms around Hanabi, her sister quickly reciprocating the gesture. "I'm so happy to see you guys," she expressed gratefully, moving down the line to hug everyone else, making Suki gasp in pain. "Sorry." The Uchiha heirs waved her concern off, grimacing slightly. "Don't worry about it. I'm glad to see a familiar face as well." "When did your team get here?" she asked. That Hinata didn't appear to be tired. "Early this morning," she replied easily, giving Samui a friendly squeeze. "We pushed through the night and ambushed another team before the sun came up. Shino's eating, I think, and Kiba's still sleeping." After Hinata embraced Naruto, pressing a kiss to cheek, the hybrid gestured for the girls to gather around. "Now that we're secluded, let me take care of your injuries, ladies," he said softly, his hands glowing with warm golden light. He held his hands up, an ethereal orb forming between his palms. It pulsed softly, bathing them light and chiming softly. Team 7 sighed in unison as their injuries were healed, Sakura standing up by herself and Suki straightening as her sides stopped hurting. The light faded, leaving them healed, but still tired from their ordeal. As if on cue, Team 7 yawned in unison while Samui and Yujito's stomachs growled. "The cafeteria is that way," Hinata pointed down a hallway, giggling lightly at the embarrassed looks on their faces. "The rooms are 1 floor up." The blonde sisters traded questioning looks, before both nodded. "We're going to the cafeteria," Yujito said for them, turning to walk away. "We'll find you guys later." Hinata lead the rest up a floor, to a hall lined with doors, some with a white card on the front and others without. The doors with the cards are being used, she explained, seeing their confused looks. There's one on the wall right as you walk in, just put stick to the front, so that the others know not to come in unless it's their room. Team 7 found a cardless door and said goodbye, leaving Hinata and Naruto alone for a while. He grabbed a room next to theirs, sticking his card on the door, and marking it with a leaf and a Yugao's name, so that the blondes would be able to find him. Not that they needed it, but for simplicity's sake. Turning, the hybrid wrapped his arms around the Hyuga heiress, tilting her chin up and pressing his lips against hers. I'm glad you're safe, he murmured once they separated. I know you can take care of yourself, but I can't help but worry for your safety, you know. I know, she replied softly, kissing him again. I was worried about you, too. Smiling, they parted ways, Naruto closing his door and flopping on one of the beds, falling asleep almost immediately. Hinata watched him slumber for a few minutes, using her clan's eyes to peer through the wall, before she slept in the door, and closed it behind her, disrobing and climbing under the covers with her love. She laid herself on his chest, his heartbeat thrumming in her ears, and fell asleep quickly. Naruto woke up slowly, finding a female body lying next to him. He had rolled onto his side in his sleep, and a woman in his arms had curled up against his chest. She was kissing the skin of his chest softly, her fingers running over his pectorals. He sniffed the air, finding the scent of various flowers, mostly medical ones, with the strongest being lavender. Hinata. He whispered, feeling silken tresses in his hand. Hinata froze in surprise, heat rushing to her cheeks. No. She squeaked in embarrassment. Feeling foolish, she rolled in Naruto's arms, so that her back was to his chest, and he couldn't see her bright red face. The hybrid squeezed her gently. What's wrong, Hinata? He asked softly, nuzzling her hair. I wanted to too. She gulped loudly in the otherwise empty room. Ever since we kissed during the festival, I've wanted you, all of you. She admitted in a breathy, embarrassed whisper. Well, he replied, kissing the back of her neck, making her gasp sharply. I'm right here, Hinata. If you want me, I won't say no. Here, Naruto removed the hand around her stomach, and held it up in front of her face. Take my hand, and just show me what you want. Hinata bit her lip, her fingers grasping the hand in front of her. She gently pressed her lips to the palm, and took it by the wrist, dragging down her face. She pulled it down past her neck, letting brush over her breasts and belly, tight with nervous energy, and then directed it into the front of her panties. Naruto kissed her neck again as wet heat engulfed his fingers. Slowly, he stroked the outside of her nether lips, Hinata clutching on his arm and moaning lowly. As he slid his fingers across her slick skin, the scent of feminine arousal began to permeate the room, and liquid flowed from her core, drenching his hand. She whimpered quietly as the heat began to build in her stomach, helped along by her love lightly licking and kissing her neck and her ear. Naruto. Hinata whispered, breathing heavily. Please more. He pulled away slightly and rolled her onto her back, looking down into her glazed moonlit eyes, as he carefully slid a finger past her lips and into her depths, her velvet walls clenching around his digit. She gasped at the intrusion, her eyes locked onto his, one of her hands gripping a handful of his hair. He leaned down, and pressed his lips to hers as her hips bucked, trying to take his finger deeper. Gently thrusting into her core, Naruto kissed around her face, enjoying the soft moans and whispers of his name issuing from her mouth. His thumb pressed against the small nub of flesh above her lips, and Hinata made a strangled gasp as the coil in her belly snapped, a flood of her juices spilling out around his hand. He gently kissed her as she shuddered, and her eyes rolled up into her head, waves of pleasure at the hands of her now lover washing through her. Eventually, the waves faded, leaving her sweaty and somewhat weary, though with an ember of heat still warm inside of her. Naruto-kun. She whispered, one of her hands running over his cheek. Lay on your back, I want all of you. Right here. Complying, the hybrid laid himself back, pushing the pants he had fallen asleep in off, and letting his arousal stand free. Hinata shuffled on top of him, straddling his hips, his length pressed against her nether lips. She licked her lips nervously, taking it in her hand and softly stroking it. Hinata. Naruto whispered, feeling her silky skin pulling on his arousal. Looking down at the flesh in her hand, Hinata felt nervous, but determined. Feeling ready, she pushed herself up on her knees and lined the tip up with her entrance, and slowly, very slowly sunk down on his length. She gasped and panted heavily at the sudden intrusion, the uncomfortable stretching sensation joined with a tingle of pleasure. Her hips rested against his as she took all of him inside of her, shuddering atop him as her virginity was given away. Naruto refrained from moving, instead bringing one of his hands up from her waist to massage her stomach, trying to help her relax. Take your time, he murmured encouragingly. Hinata rocked her hips, and moaned as pleasure shot through her. His length was hotter than she thought it would be, and it was far better than she hoped. She slowly withdrew him from her depths, and sunk him back in, planting her hands on his chest to stabilize herself. He thrust up into her core as she took him in, their pace never going above slow, tender lovemaking. Hinata. He murmured after what seemed to be hours of whimpers and moans of their names. I'm nearly there. Me too. She whispered, leaning forward to meet his eyes. Naruto. Naruto grit his teeth as he thrust into her, planting himself deep inside as his orgasm suddenly hit, sending a flood of white into her depths. Hinata dug her fingernails into his skin as her walls suddenly clenched his length tightly, and pleasure began to thrum through her veins. She kissed him passionately as his orgasm came with hers. Finally, the intensity faded, leaving both panting heavily and awash in the afterglow. "It's so hot," she mumbled, feeling the evidence of their love-making deep inside of her core. Tears began to drip from her eyes, rolling down her cheeks to splash onto Naruto's chest. Worried, the hybrid wrapped his arms around his lover comfortingly. "Hinata, what's wrong?" he asked in concern. Hinata looked up into his eyes, a beautiful smile curving her lips as joyful tears continued to spill from her eyes. "I'm complete," she whispered ecstatically. "You complete me, Naruto-kun. I love you. I love you so much. Hinata." His words were cut off as she seized him by the cheeks and planted a passionate kiss to his lips. "You don't." Hinata's words were interrupted as Naruto kissed her back, brushing his tongue through her lips to embrace hers. He pulled back, looking into her eyes with as much sincerity as he could muster. "Hinata, I love you too." She gasped quietly, knowing how hard it would be for him to say those words. "Naruto." He ran a hand through her violet tresses, a steaming tear quietly rolling down his cheek. "I love you, Hinata Hyuga." "I do." Hinata buried her face in his shoulder, her arms wrapped tightly around him as her heart thundered with love. Naruto held her fiercely, feeling much the same. Though, in the back of his mind, guilt wormed its way into his thoughts. And for the very first time, Naruto Uzumaki cursed Hinata. He cursed Abella for doing what she had, cursed her for twisting his being, and being responsible for drawing so many women to him, and him to them. He couldn't not love them. He loved the women in his life, as numerous as they were, and they loved him back, but none of them had a choice in the matter. And neither did he. Married or in relationship, homosexual or just not interested in anyone, they would be drawn to him, and he in return would be drawn to them. And they would love each other. The most beautiful and terrible thing. Naruto awoke to a burning pain in his right hand. Slowly lifting it up, he found that it had begun to change again, the sharp black nails becoming talons, the scales becoming thicker. Grunting softly, he focused his will on the limb, clenching his hand into a fist. Slowly, the scales receded into his normally gray skin, though his fingernails retained their talon shape. "The more you push the transformation back, the more it will hurt when it comes around," Aljun softly warned inside his head. "I know this, Dad. You've told me that every time I've done it," Naruto replied dryly. "Because it's very much true," his father said sternly. "The pain of the final transformation is already incredible, this is only adding to it. And I don't see why you don't just let it finish," Kyuubi snorted. "You're all worried about what those human bitches will think and keeping it a secret from your enemies, but really, you're a dead or damned dragon. And you have me inside of you. Your enemies will either fall to our might, or flee and die running." "Our might?" Naruto thought with a sly smirk. "Getting a little possessive, aren't you?" The nine-tailed fox huffed in derision and embarrassment. "We are to be mated by Deidre law. As much as I might not like it, I might as well make the best of the situation. Don't get all sappy on me, little squishy lizard." The hybrid rolled his eyes at her personality. "Whatever. I'm surprised Ember didn't chip in with her opinion." "The fire girl is sulking," Aljun replied with a tone of amusement. "She's jealous, once again, that you decided to get some human lady lovin', instead of summoning her for a blazing romp." "I'm not." Ember cried from another corner of Naruto's mind, hurling a ball of fire at the world leader's face. It splashed harmlessly over his black scales, and he shot the flame at her in an amused look. She maturely responded by blowing a raspberry at him and turning away to pout in the corner. "Maybe later, Ember, once we're in an area that isn't flammable," Naruto remarked calmly, ignoring the following cheer. Naruto-kun?" A sweet voice asked as Hinata stirred from her sleep. She looked down on him with half-lidded lavender-tinted eyes. "Morning." He gently ran his fingers through her long violet hair. "Morning, Hinata. How do you feel?" he asked softly. The Hyuga heiress shifted her legs a little, and groaned in discomfort. "I'm sore," she whispered, her face twisting slightly. "But otherwise, it was the best night of sleep I've ever had. I'm glad I could show you how much I love you, Naruto-kun." "Me too," he replied, letting off a minor healing spell to help with the soreness. "Let's take a shower and get clean." They slipped out of bed and made their way into the bathroom, which was small, but big enough for two people. As was the usual with two attractive people ending up naked under the spray of hot water, in a confining space, they ended up making love 2 more times before actually getting clean. 3 days later, the remaining teams were gathered on a long balcony, overlooking an arena that was set in a large natural cavern under the spire, that had been cleared and supported with white pillars of rock. The group consisting of the Raikage, the 2 Jonin proctors of the previous exams flanking him, and the Jonin sensei for the teams remaining all posing in front of a carving of Kumo's cloud symbol. The long-haired Jonin from Oto seemed to be enjoying him herself, taking an exaggerated praying mantis's pose behind Kakashi. "Look around you," Yusuke L cried to the gathered teams. All of the genin in this room have passed the second exam as of right now. Congratulations, you little bastards. No one cheered. They were all gathered in an arena for a reason, and it wasn't likely that reason would be to tell them when the next exam would be. Otherwise, why have them come to an arena? 64 genin teams arrived in Kumo about a week ago, and after the first exam, 33 remained to take the second exam, and now there are 13 teams left, which is 39 genin. She continued, planting her hands on her hips. Now, the third exam is a tournament-style battle, with 2 genin facing off against one another until only one remains. That would be 19 matches with 1 bye, and that is too damn much. The Raikage stepped forward, cutting off his cousin. Allow me to explain. Elle cut right in front of him with an irritated look on her face. I wasn't done. This is the last part I get to explain, so I'm going to milk it for all it's worth, cousin. She shouted at him. He rolled his eyes and nodded, stepping back. As I was saying, that many matches would take all damn day, and the big wigs coming to watch you try to kill each other don't have an attention span long enough for that shit. Elle announced, a smirk playing about her lips. So, instead of that, we are having a preliminary round right here, right now. Random paired battles to separate the Chunin hopefuls from the genin failures. And one 3-way match, because I'm bored. A few noises of outrage were made, and subsequently ignored by the barely clothed and tattooed jonin as the Raikage stepped forward once again. Since these battles will be done individually, if you wish to withdraw, it won't affect your team at this point. I said levelly. It's not like anyone's going to know that you quit out like a little bitch 2/3 of the way through the Chunin exams, or that they'll point and laugh at you behind your back or anything. Elle yelled tauntingly, her arms crossed. The gathered jonin vanished in a burst of speed, appearing behind their teams on the balcony. I see you all made it in one piece, Yugao commented with a small smile as Naruto, Samui, and Yujiro turned to look at her. Good job. Now, do you have a plan to deal with whoever you may face? Samui shrugged uncaringly, her eyes sweeping down the teams. It's supposed to be random, so the best we could do is try our best to quickly come up with a strategy and not show off all we can do. She muttered, leaning on the railing. That's the gist of my plan, Yujiro nodded in agreement. What about you, Naruto? His red eyes were fixed on the pair of Oto shinobi, glaring steadily at them. I'm hoping to get them, he growled, flexing his fingers to crack the knuckles. Their sensei glanced at the genin with a raised eyebrow. Why? Oto isn't that well known, what could they have done to make you angry? She asked as the hybrid stuck his pipe between his lips. You know I managed to get out of the arrow before it dumped into the hunting grounds, right? He questioned around the stem, stuffing the bowl with herbs. Well, I managed to claw my way out, and pull myself up on the bank, where those 3 found me. I had a couple shards of rock sticking out of my back, so the bandaged one declared me useless, and had the other guy shoot me off the cliff with some kind of wind jutsu. The 3 women turned angry glares on the Oto team, scowling. They had been almost directly responsible for their teammate, fiancé and student's half-a-year disappearance. The girl was reluctant, but she didn't fight them on it, though she did look regretful. Naruto noted, snapping his fingers and bringing the small flame down to light his pipe. That's why I'm hoping to get them as the 3-way battle. He cleared his throat, calling attention to himself. Ahem. We will now be starting the preliminary round. The round ends when your enemy is unconscious or incapable of fighting, or if I say so. Now, the first match is between. A projector that had been rolled out flickered to life, throwing 2 images on a nearby wall. One was of a rough-faced male wearing an Aiwa Hideate next to a headshot of Atsui. Atsuchi of Aiwa and Atsui of Kumo. Samui's brother whooped and flipped over the railing, coming up to point up at his sister. Ni-chan, watch your hotshot brother win this match. He shifted to glare at the tall man next to her. And I'm coming for you next. Naruto calmly arched an eyebrow, and blew a smoke ring, and then gave the blonde the finger. Atsuchi, a rather large genin with dark blue hair and a leather vest, came down to the arena, taking up a spot across from the blonde Kumo genin. He looked towards the Raikage, who raised his hand and brought it down. Hajime. The Aiwa genin nodded to Atsui and sank into the ground, vanishing from sight. His opponent scanned the area around him, trying to spot the genin when a crack came from under his feet. Atsui hopped back just in time to avoid a thin spike of rock that would have speared his groin. Not hot. Not hot at all. Atsui cried in dismay as Atsuchi erupted from the rock behind the Kumo ninja, punching him in the back of the head. The blonde rolled over the ground and shot back to his feet, hands in a seal around his mouth, shooting a ball of fire from his lips. The Aiwa ninja slid under the attack and hurled a handful of shuriken at his enemy, before diving back into the ground. Atsui pulled his katana from its sheath, and deflected the metal stars into the wall behind him, before kicking off of the wall, and jumping into the center of the arena as Atsuchi popped out of the earth in his previous spot. The blonde sprinted at the Aiwa genin, shooting another fireball at his feet and leaping into the air. The Aiwa ninja hopped over the fireball in time, to meet the blonde's feet with his chest, getting kicked back into the wall and the shuriken embedded there. He shouted in pain, before going silent as Atsui held the edge of his blade to his throat. Atsuchi cannot continue, so Atsui is the winner. Announced as the other teams clapped. The Iowa Genin slunk off to get his injuries healed as the blonde cheered. Look, Ni-chan, I won. Aren't you proud of your brother? Samui, who had taken to leaning on the railing on one fist, raised her other hand and waved it around slowly with a flat "yeah." The projected images flickered again, before being replaced with two new ones. Chijuro of Kieri and Kiba Inuzuka of Konoha. The two Genin stepped down to the arena and took up positions. Naruto looked up as someone sidled next to him. Aheyo, Naruto-kun, Haku greeted him kindly, smiling a gentle smile. Hey Haku. How are you doing? He asked with a relaxed tone, blowing a series of smoke rings. The Kieri Genin shrugged and leaned against the wall, crossing her arms. No different than when we met a few days ago. That had been an interesting meeting. No one could fault Naruto for wanting to grab some food, not after a basically sleepless night, followed by combat and a night of sex. His stomach had been growling like a beast for hours, and it was time for some satisfaction. After gathering his breakfast, which consisted mostly of meat, a large glass of milk, and more meat, the hybrid sat down at an empty table and dug in. After a few minutes, in which he cleared half of his plate, he felt a soft touch on his shoulder. Wiping his mouth, Naruto turned to look at the person who touched him, jumping in surprise. Haku? He asked in shock. Looking down on him with wide soft brown eyes, was the ice-wielding Kunoichi he had met in Nami. Time had been kind to her, Naruto noted, looking her over. She had become slightly taller, and had filled out just a little more, gaining the mature look of a woman. She wore a dark blue battle kimono that hugged her figure nicely, with a pair of tanto tucked into the black obi around her waist. It is you, Naruto-kun. Haku said in a disbelieving but happy tone. The hybrid stood up, quickly finding himself with an armful of kunoichi as Haku hugged him around the neck. It's good to see you, Haku-chan. It's been a long time, he murmured as she slid out of his arms and landed on the floor. You look different, Naruto-kun, she noted obviously, as he had grown maybe 2 feet in height since their last meeting. A thought struck her. Why haven't you been answering the letters I sent you? This was asked with a sad and adorable hurt puppy look, and Naruto instantly felt guilty. I'm sorry about that, Haku-chan, and it's a long story. Do you want to join me for breakfast and I'll tell you all about it? And that was an interesting conversation, Naruto thought as he watched Kiba lunge at Chijuro with Akamaru, twisting into a contained tornado of claws, one of the Inuzuka's signature jutsu Kitsuga. The Kieri Genin, apparently a trainee looking to join the Seven Swordsmen, carried a common Zanbato on his back, and used a white blade to smack the twin drills away from himself. From an outside observation, my life is pretty unbelievable. I can see that. Aljun agreed, nodding. Chijuro soaked the Konoha Genin with a wave of water spat from his mouth, and while the Inuzuka shook the shock off, he dashed across the space separating them, and slapped Kiba in the face with the broadside of his sword, sending him sailing through the air, and into a wall, knocking him out. Kurenai sighed in disappointment as her Genin was carried out of the arena. Kiba was just plain outmatched, she grumbled, crossing her arms. Now I know what to focus his training on, at least. Naruto glanced at a guilty-looking Haku, who was humming and looking at the ceiling. What are you doing here, Haku? Naruto asked after explaining his disappearance. You were clearly Chunin level when I met you. I also refuse to believe that you've gotten weaker over time. The Kieri Genin blushed in embarrassment, playing with one of her bangs. Well, Kieri just ended a war that took out half of the standing ninja forces. We're trying to get new clients, and the Chunin exams are one of the best ways to do so. And, well, we need a good showing, so the Mizukage decided to spoof the exam results by sending in 2 teams of Chunin. The hybrid frowned minutely, before nodding his head. I can see that, he replied, nodding in agreement. H of Kumo and Samui Nai of Kukonoha. Announced, stumbling slightly over the village his daughter actually lived in, though it was hard to hear. The blonde Kunoichi took a bracing breath as her sister and fiancé patted her shoulders. Good luck, they uttered to her, and she nodded in response, before slipping under the railing and landing quietly on the arena floor. She took up her spot across from H, a dark-skinned Genin with her stark white hair cut into a mohawk, wearing a sleeveless black blouse and a red sash around her waist, and ninjato sitting on her hip. Samui-san. She nodded in acknowledgement to Samui. The blonde returned the gesture and looked to the Raikage, who started the match. Hajime. In a second, Samui drew her tanto and slashed it in front of her, sending a weak wave of lighting at her opponent before dashing behind it. H spun out of the way, moving to draw her ninjato and having to hop back as the blonde swung her blade at her stomach. Samui stepped into H's space, her blade flashing as she quickly slashed at her opponent. The silver edge nicked the Kumo Genin's cheek, and H quickly pushed off of the blonde, creating distance between them, while she ran through hand seals. Raiden. Jian. A spear of lightning leapt from H's mouth at the charging blonde, who didn't even break stride when throwing a kunai at an angle in front of her. The lightning was attracted to the metal, avoiding Samui entirely, who continued to run at the Kumo Genin. H drew her ninjato and swung it down at the blonde, her blade cutting clean through her, and then the clone faded, and Samui came down from her jump, landing a punch to the other girl's face, sending her stumbling back. As she landed, the Konoha Genin kicked the sword out of H's hands and rolled forward, bringing her Tanto up in a reverse grip. H had recovered enough to lean back and avoid the blade, but was not fast enough to dodge Samui hucking her foot behind her ankle and pulling it up, leaving her off balance and on one foot. Samui, in the same swing, flipped her knife around and wrapped her other hand around the hilt, slamming it down into H's forehead, throwing her down to the ground, and pointing the tip of her Tanto at her opponent's throat. H cannot continue, Samui wins. The whole fight had taken maybe 2 minutes. Samui stepped back and sheathed her knife, holding her hand out to the downed Genin. H took the offered hand and was pulled to her feet, going to retrieve her sword, while the blonde stepped back up to the balcony. Good work, Samui. Yugao said proudly, a small smirk on her lips. The blonde traded low fives with her sister and, flushed with victory, pulled her fiancé down and planted a fierce kiss on his lips in front of all the Genin, Jonin, and her father, who directed a heavy dose of killing intent at Naruto and was ignored by the hybrid. They found Samui's tongue sliding between his lips to tangle with his own. Ahem. They called loudly, bumping the projector. The next match is between Yamaguchi of Iwa and Kato of Kiri. But even that went unheard as Samui, in an out-of-character display of affection, hopped up and wrapped her legs around Naruto's waist, pushing him into the wall, and earning a muffled grunt as the deadly bastard's sword dug into his back. One of his hands gripped her thigh to hold her in place, and the other rested between her shoulder blades, while Samui wrapped one arm securely around his neck and ran her hand through his dark gray hair. Naruto found the world outside of Samui's mouth fading away, her tongue coiling around his, and pulling it through her lips, a soft moan coming from her throat as he returned the kiss fiercely. After 10 minutes, the two finally separated, Samui hopping down from her spot and wiping her lips of stray saliva, smirking in satisfaction. Glancing at her sister, she noticed the blonde Jinchuriki giving her a questioning look. What? She asked innocently. Vegito pointed between her and Naruto, who was retrieving his dropped pipe and relighting it. What was that about? The blonde shrugged, crossing her arms. I wanted to. Adrenaline. Take your pick. She replied simply. And look at the face Dad's making. True to her words, the Raikage looked rather displeased at the intimate showing, a definitely not a pout frown on his darkly skinned face. Eyes unconscious, Miyu wins. He announced with a growl directed at his daughter's fiancé. The Miss Genin with the slim Naginata bowed, her light blue hair falling over her face, and went back to her team, as the unconscious Kumo Genin was carted out of the arena. Next match is Suki Uchiha vs Misumi Tsurugi of Konoha. Suki pointed at herself, then at Naruto. When I win, we're doing the same thing. She stated firmly before slipping under the railing to face the masked Misumi. Someone's getting lucky tonight. Kakashi sang teasingly, waggling his eyebrows at the slightly embarrassed hybrid. Yasuma sighed in dismay, palming his face. Good God, Kakashi, that's the Raikage's daughter. So? The gray-haired Jonin replied, giving the glaring a cheery wave. Suki stood across from her opponent, stretching her arms out in preparation for the upcoming fight. She, like everyone else, had changed in the time Naruto had been gone, finding a friendly rival in Samui, even wearing something similar to the blonde, a light leather armor top. Colored dark blue with the Uchiha fan on her padded shoulders, a length of thin chain wrapped around her chest and comfortable, non-restricting black pants. She also wore a pair of thick leather boots that had small, sharp hooks on the toe and the heel, and where Samui wore simple bracers, she instead had fingerless gloves with metal-studded knuckles. Her opponent, a male Genin wearing a sleeveless dark purple shirt with a matching veil, and dark eyes gleaming with barely concealed sadism behind round glasses. You're so arrogant with your abilities, he noted, a smirk in his voice. I can't wait to show you just how weak you are. Suki arched an eyebrow at him, fixing her black hair into a high bun, and keeping it in place with a pair of metal chopsticks. Sounds like someone's jealous. She replied dryly, a length of her hair hanging on the left side of her face. I'll snap your neck. He yelled angrily, taking a strangely limp stance. Hit a nerve, did I? Suki taunted, moving into the opening pose of her intercepting fist. He raised his hand in the air, and brought it down, yelling, Hajime. Misumi immediately charged, throwing a handful of shuriken at the Uchiha, who dodged them easily, and returned a kunai, waiting for the other Genin to reach her. She deflected his punch and made to retaliate, when his fingers audibly dislocated and stretched unnaturally, wrapping around her wrist. What? Suki muttered as Misumi suddenly slipped around her, his limbs popping and stretching and slithering around her, pulling her right arm behind her back, his arm wrapping around her torso and neck, and his legs trapping hers. Forfeit or I'll snap all of your bones. The Konoha Genin growled triumphantly, squeezing her painfully. Or don't, that would be more fun. Suki flinched, before her dark eyes went wide, then narrowed in fury. She brought her head forward, and then whipped it back, slamming it into Misumi's nose. And while he reeled from the blow, she brought one of her hands up in a half-seal and muttered, Kawarimi. The veiled man suddenly found himself awkwardly wrapped around a stalactite and off balance, once the cloud of smoke faded. Suki, now on the far left side of the arena, made a simple seal, and vanished in the characteristic blur of speed common in non-elemental Shunshin. She came out of the technique a few feet in front of her opponent, in flying kick that shattered the rock, and sent him stumbling back. Taking advantage of the opening, she flew through 4 seals, the last bringing her hands to her mouth. Kaiten, Hai no Tama. She whispered angrily, shooting a small but intense ball of flames into Misumi's chest. The other Genin screamed in pain as the fire burst on his chest, burning his skin and setting his veil alight. Suki quickly crossed the distance and drew her foot back, before lashing out and landing the kick right between his legs. Most everyone flinched. Getting kicked in the groin, male or female, hurt. Elle, however, threw her head back, and laughed as Kakashi cheered, "That's my student." Misumi, understandably in a lot of pain, sunk to his knees clutching his abused and punctured balls. Suki was not done. She grabbed him by the shoulder and tilted him back, bringing her fist up and landing a trio of heavy punches to his face, his glasses and nose audibly crunching. The final blow sent him tumbling back, bloody, burnt, bruised and unconscious, mercifully. Raise his hand. Misumi is unable to fight, the winner is Suki Uchiha. The Uchiha heiress huffed and straightened her hair, which had slipped from the bun she kept it in. She turned on her heel and marched up the steps to the balcony, pushed Naruto against the railing, and did much like Samui by hopping up, wrapping her legs around his waist, and kissing him heavily. Naruto's pipe clattered to the ground once again, and Kakashi sniffed, and wiped away a proud tear. "That's my student," he said happily, kicking ass, balls, in this case, and taking what she wants. So proud. Hanabi shot her teacher a disturbed and annoyed look. "Why do you have to be so weird, sensei?" "I agree with your student, Kakashi," Might Guy declared, so unyouthful. Najiko crossed her arms, and rolled her eyes. "Like you have any room to talk," she muttered, playing with a black shuriken. Bei, looking more displeased than ever, noted that his daughters didn't look all that angry that their fiancé was kissing another woman. Next match is Tansu of Kiri vs F of Kumo. Suki, not content with the placement of Naruto's hands, grabbed his wrist and pushed it down from her back to cupping her rear, then went back to hungrily kissing him. Samui rolled her eyes and nudged her friendly rival's leg. "Sex isn't for public viewing, Suki," she said flatly, with the Uchiha glaring up at her. "Fuck off," Suki muttered, pulling away from her partner for a second. "You see him more often than I do. But you should be watching the matches, taking note of possible enemies' weaknesses," Samui pointed out, fully aware of her hypocrisy and not caring even little. Torn between wanting to continue her activities and the logic of Samui's remark, Suki sighed and stood up, wiping her mouth. She would have offered her hand to Naruto, but he was much taller than she was. "We're continuing this." "Fuck yes we are," the hybrid murmured, his instincts pulling on his arousal. He pulled a pinch of herbs from his pouch and ate them to calm his libido. "I don't know how much longer I would be able to hold myself back." "Then don't." Aljun called. "There's still a match going on, which means there's still time for a quick." "Shut up, scaly one," Kyuubi shouted back, obviously irritated. "You're just jealous." Naruto blocked out the voices in his head and lit his pipe, drawing in the slightly spicy smoke. He held the smoke in his lungs for a few minutes, letting the calming sensation spread before blowing it out. As he did, the fight ended as the two Genin shot techniques at each other, one a spear of lightning that shocked the Kiri Genin into unconsciousness, and the other a compressed bullet of water that slammed into the Kumo Genin's face and knocked him out. Due to a double knockout, the match is draw. Announced as the projector flickered once more. The next match is Okada Yoroi vs Hanabi Hyuga of Konoha. Haku, her face very red, coughed into her hand as the fight began. "So, Naruto-kun, what's with all the affection?" she asked, stuttering lightly. "To be honest," he replied, taking a deep breath. "You would have to ask them, because I've got no damn clue. I guess you could describe it as an open relationship." "Ah." She nodded, watching Hanabi strike the veiled Genin rapidly, ending the combo with a kick to the face that sent him tumbling to the ground. Hanabi Hyuga wins. "So, how open is your relationship?" the Kiri Genin asked innocently, the pinkness in her cheeks betraying the intentions behind the question. "Very open," he replied as Hanabi walked up the steps. Naruto was anticipating another kissing attack, and was mildly surprised when the Hyuga heiress turned her nose up and huffed, marching back to her team. "She's probably angry that you had sex with her sister before her," his father pointed out reasonably. "Yeah, they do have that weird sort of competition thing that seems to run in the twins of the family," Naruto thought back as the projector flickered. Next match is Hiyori of Kiri and Kabuto of Konoha. Haku wished her teammate good luck, while the hybrid next to her watched the gray-haired, bespectacled Genin with a suspicious face. "What?" Naruto huffed, blowing a cloud of smoke. "That Kabuto guy, he makes me suspicious. I can't exactly say why." The fight was not all that long. While Kabuto did put up a good fight, it was painfully obvious that he was a medic and not suited for the battlefield. His opponent, Akiri Kunoichi with dark green eyes, short dark blonde hair and a pierced nose, showed her abilities with the elongated kunai she favored. Elle spoke up after he announced the winner. The next match is the three-way. She yelled cheerfully, clapping her hands. And the lucky little bastard who get to fight are. The hybrid narrowed his eyes on the projector, trying to impose his will on it at a distance. Naruto Uzumaki from Konoha and Zaku Abumi and Dosu Kanuda of Odo. The vicious smile that curled Naruto's lips bared most of his fangs, which there seemed to be far too many of for a human mouth. Hold this, please. He passed his pipe to Yujiro and hopped over the railing, the ground cracking beneath his feet as he landed. Dosu and Zaku traded looks and nodded. They would take out the Konoha Genin first, then fight each other. Naruto pulled the bastard's sword off of his back and propped it on his shoulder, looking across the arena at the Odo Genin with murder in his dark red eyes. Zankyuha! Zaku shouted, throwing his hands out and releasing the technique through the tubes in his palms. Naruto slipped around the attack and continued his charge, bringing his sword down on the Odo Genin. The bandaged one leapt back from the strike, as the other pulled a kunai to defend himself, raising it to deflect the blow. Shing. The deadly bastard sliced right through the metal of the common kunai and continued, lopping Zaku's right hand off above the wrist. The Odo Genin stared at his dismembered limb in shock as Dosu leaped forward, swinging the gauntlet on his left arm at Naruto. He missed by a wide margin, though Naruto stumbled as he was struck by a sudden bout of dizziness. The bandaged Genin seemed to strike at the air wildly, making his opponent clumsily step back as his eardrums were assaulted by a barrage of drilling sound attacks. Zaku, now. Dosu ordered, pulling a trio of explosive notes from his pouch and throwing them at Naruto's feet. The other Genin clutched the stump of his wrist to his chest and threw out his other hand, firing off a stronger version of his technique, just as the explosives went off with a thunderous clap. Silence fell as the cloud of smoke hid what may have happened to Naruto. It was then broken by Hey, Dumbases, we're underground. Easy with explosives. Ignoring her, Zaku turned to his teammate. Did that do it? He asked, panting in pain. The whoosh echoed through the air and suddenly, the deadly bastard's sword came whirling out of the cloud of smoke. It cleaved through Zaku's shoulder and continued, embedding into the stone wall behind him. Zaku screamed in pain and that was cut off as a chain whipped out of the cloud and wrapped itself around his neck before pulling him into the cloud. How nice to see you. Naruto's voice, deep and murderous, echoed through the arena as the cloud of smoke took on the color of a smoke bomb. No. I didn't mean it, I was just no. Ah. A fleshy ripping sound cut off the scream. Dosu, sweating under his bandages, held his melody arm at the ready. A dark shape flew through the cloud of smoke and landed at his feet with a wet thump. It was Zaku's body, now missing the head. Two glowing red orbs loomed out of the smoke, which faded to show Naruto standing unharmed in a small blasted crater, holding the bleeding head of Zaku easily in one hand, smoke rising from his grip. With an almost negligent squeeze, Naruto crushed the head in a burst of blood, bone and embers. Dosu threw his melody arm out desperately as the hybrid stalked toward him, causing the Konoha Genin to stumble as the attack assaulted his ears. In response, Naruto brought his hands up to his ears, extended his forefingers and shoved the talons in his ears. Shaking his head, blood dripping from his ears, he stalked forward, breaking out into a spring as Dosu found his main weapon no longer effective. Before the Odo Genin could react, Naruto picked him up and slammed him into the wall, his right arm coming back, his talons brought together to form a spear, and drove his hand into Dosu's stomach. The Odo Genin cried out in pain, blood staining the bandages around his mouth, as Naruto brought his left hand up and made a half-tiger before spreading his fingers. Dosu screamed as smoke poured out of his nose, and his coverings burned away as fire erupted from his mouth. Naruto twisted his hand, the fire spell intensifying, and twin jets of flame burst from the other Genin's eyes. Naruto kept the spell up, burning away all of the flesh on Dosu's skull, and when he pulled away, only his legs and part of his arms remained, the rest turned into so much charcoal. The mostly burned corpse collapsed to his knees, then fell forward, scattering the ashes of the Genin across the floor. Naruto Uzumaki wins by fatality. L whooped in appreciation. Naruto removed his sword from the wall and slung it on his back, making his way back up to the balcony, where he took his pipe from Yujiro and relit it before sitting on the ground in a meditative position. The matches continued after that brutal showing. Next match is Shino of Konoha and Temari of Suna. He called, a troubled look on his face. Shino glanced at her to-be opponent, and noted the fan strapped to her back, and then drew her conclusions on what a battle between them would be like. I forfeit my match, she announced dully, before moving and sitting next to Naruto. Alright, fine. Said to himself. Next up is Haku of Kieri and Sakura Haruno of Konoha. The battle was rather short once again. Sakura had definitely improved from her beginning Genin days, but Haku was already a Chunin, and outclassed her in speed and experience. She wasn't mean, though, and did the minimum amount of damage it took to bring the pink-haired Genin down, and made her forfeit. Yujiro faced Rihime from Iwa next. Hey, big guy. The Iwa Genin called up to the balcony. If I win, will you give me a kiss? Naruto opened one eye and peered down at her with a corked eyebrow. I don't know who you are. He replied simply. I'm Rihime from Iwa. She shouted back, brushing her dark orange hair out of her eyes. Oh? No. Damn. The Iowa Genin snapped her fingers in disappointment. Then she noticed Yujiro giving her a strange look. What? I like big guys, okay. What about Choji? The blonde asked, pointing at the Akimichi, who gave an embarrassed wave. Eh? Arihime rubbed the back of her head sheepishly. I mean like, physically big guys, not chubby ones, no offense. Then she winked at the Reikage, and snapped her fingers. No? I said flatly, shaking his head. Hajime. Naruto watched as the two kunoichi battled, noting that Yujiro was using her flexibility to avoid attacks, and using her fire element more than her lightning. He slipped back into his meditation, and the outside world slipped away. His animal instincts of arousal and bloodlust warred in his head, and he needed to control himself. Naruto. Someone bumped his shoulder, pulling him out of his trance. Looking up, he saw the crimson eyes of Kurenai looking down at him. The preliminary matches are done, now the winners are being sorted into brackets. Come on. Pushing himself up, the hybrid joined the Jonin on the way down to the arena floor. So, who won? He asked, storing his pipe away. Ino defeated the white-haired Kumo shinobi, Amoy, by using her mind transfer jutsu on him, and making him forfeit. Hinata beat the Odo Genin Kin, she said proudly. Shikamaru lost to Kari, I think her name is. I don't know what he said, but it pissed her off pretty bad. Ichiko beat the puppet using Sunin in Konkuro, while Lee lost to Garin, who suffocated him into unconsciousness with her sand. And Tenten got a bye. Ooh, Naruto hissed, noticing the irritated expression on his oldest friend's face. That definitely pissed her off. Kurenai nodded in agreement. Yes, it did. The hybrid took up his place at the end of the line of winners, the Jonin standing by with the Genin who hadn't needed to be treated for their injuries. Congratulations to you all for winning. He began, folding his arms behind his back. In 1 month, the third exam will take place in front of many important people. Daimyo, future clients, and your own cage, who will be observing your matches, and rating you for promotion to Chunin. The month-long gap between exams is for you to train and prepare for your next battles, which will be decided the day of the exam. You will all be given separate training grounds. I wish you all luck. Everyone bowed in respect to the Reikage, and followed Elle as she led them from the arena. This next month would be very interesting for everyone. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want a next part of this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification, and also check out the other videos that I have created, and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.